What a headshot! What a head!
How's it guys, this is Dayvy, FPL, and welcome back to the Fantasy Premier League video here on my channel. Now in this video, I'll be taking you guys to the ultimate guide to the upcoming Double Game Week 27. So Double Game Week 26, Double Game Week 27, is this going to be the redemption week for us wildcarders? Hopefully, I think this game week provides the best opportunity to get back on the green arrow side of things, so hopefully that's going to come true. Now in this ultimate guide, I'll be going through the usual talking points, relatively kind of quieter game week, to be honest. I think that's kind of natural after a wildcard week, kind of all the excitement, all the planning, but now's where the points hopefully flow through. But don't worry, still have the usual talking points to go over. I'm going to go over the stats review if you guys are looking for options to bring in, maybe even for the captaincy debate. The best and worst attacking stats, the best and worst defensive stats might be quite useful. And then I'll move on to some talking points relating to questions about how many hits should you guys be taking for the upcoming doubles and blanks if you guys haven't chosen to use the wildcard. Then there'll be a big talking point around the bench boost. Is this week actually the best week to bench boost, or is Double Game Week 29 still in the plan? And then finally, as you always do, going to wrap it up with captaincy, which this week is a very interesting debate. Should we go for a double game week option, and which double game week team, Brighton vs Brentford, or is a single game week captain maybe even better? So you guys interested in those talking points? Sit back, relax, and let's get straight into it. So going over the stats review, and as mentioned, this could be quite useful for transfers in. If you guys are on a wildcard, maybe target these sides. And even for the captaincy debate, maybe you guys see a team with bad defensive form that your attack is playing against. Now the first stat we're going to go over is going to be XG non-penalty. Now I always do choose the non-penalty variant, as I do think that penalties aren't super sustainable. For example, with Brighton, didn't go for McAllister. What ends up happening, he gets a penalty, scores the chance. So it's obviously great if you guys picked him. But I choose to use the non-penalty stats, as with my attackers, not all of them do have penalties. And as mentioned, penalties aren't super sustainable. So going over the entire season, what I'm going to be going over is the left-hand side will be the entire season stats, and the right-hand side will be the last 6 game weeks. Now there is kind of a big talking point about the last 6, with all the blanks, the doubles that have happened over the prior game weeks. The minimum game weeks is going to be 6, but the maximum is going to be 9. For example, there's some teams that only played 6 games, with some teams that have played 9 fixtures, so please just take note of that. But going on to the easier to explain left-hand side over the entire season, we do have the best attacking stats. And as you guys can see at the top of the stat, we do have those Liverpool assets with an XG of 1.94 per game. These are all per game averages, so you guys don't have to worry about the amount of games they've played. So what did wildcarders do in terms of the Game Week 26 wildcard? They transferred the best attack out of their team, Liverpool. And surely that's not going to come back to bite us this week where they do face Bournemouth. Now to get the full kind of extent of that stat, wait till you see the defensive stats of Bournemouth, because spoiler alert, they're not very good. So Liverpool assets come in first, narrowly beating Man City of 1.93. We then have Arsenal, Brighton, Man United and Newcastle. So now I see that Brighton are still up there. Now with those United stats, this kind of proves that maybe that Liverpool game was a little bit of an anomaly. They have a very good attack this season and simply couldn't score against one of the worst defenses. Now going to the right hand side, I'm going to show you guys the last 6 game weeks at a minimum. Please remember, a minimum of 6, a maximum of 9. And we see Brighton with a massive XG of 2.27. Now for you guys considering the captaincy, you guys will love this stat because Brighton's attack has been red hot recently and they have a lovely double game week coming up. Man City come up next with 1.95, then we have the Liverpool assets, the Arsenal, Man U and Newcastle assets, so it's almost the left hand side just rearranged. So big talking point coming out of this is going to be that Brighton attack, because a 2.27 XG over the last 6 games is absolutely mental. Now as I always say with the good, we got to go over the bad, and what this kind of is going to tell you is what defenders to play. For example, if your team is facing one of these sides, the chance of a clean sheet is going to be pretty strong. So over the entire season, we have the Crystal Palace players with 0.84. Now there's a big debate about the Crystal Palace options. Should you guys actually bring them in for their double game week? But as you guys can see on paper here, the attacking stats are simply terrible. So the worst attack over the entire season with 0.84 XG non-penalty per game, followed narrowly by Wolves and Southampton. Now Bournemouth come up next, and then Nottingham Forest and Aston Villa. So if you guys do have those Brighton defenders, great chance of a clean sheet here. The Newcastle defenders also a pretty strong chance of a clean sheet. And I know most of us are actually probably benching 1 or 2 of their assets. And if you guys still do have Trent, I mean Bournemouth's chance of attacking return is probably pretty low, so you might want to keep hold of him. Now moving on to the right hand side, and yet again you can see how bad Crystal Palace have been recently, 0.66 XG per game. So as mentioned earlier on, those Brighton defenders are an absolute must have in this game week. We then have Southampton, Fulham, Nottingham Forest, then finally Wolves and Leeds, and the Fulham attack is not one that I wanted to see because I currently am benching Gabriel. Now Wolves are also going to be in that bottom 5 over the last 6, and it's kind of between Gabriel and Trippier for the benching this week. Now big talking point out of this is that if you guys do want to go for some other attackers, some double game week options, maybe don't really look at the Southampton or Crystal Palace assets. But now go on to the defensive stats, and these are slightly more boring than the attacking stats. As an FPL manager, I always like to go for the attack over the defense, but it is always important to look at the stats. So on the left hand side over the entire season, Man City have the best defense. It's a little bit of a pity though that we can't really predict which Man City defenders will play, because at 0.89 XG per game, that's pretty respectable. We then have Arsenal. All of us own those Arsenal assets. The Newcastle defense has been rock solid this season, and I see that Chelsea are still keeping up some good form, as I have chosen Kepa as my second goalie. Then finally, Brighton and Spurs. So Brighton's defense hasn't been that bad as maybe people have been expecting, so glad to have a Stupinan in my side. Now going over the last 6 game weeks at a minimum, we have Chelsea and Brighton. Already mentioned that I do have Kepa as my goalkeeper, a Stupinan with Brighton, and then finally Brentford look pretty good in terms of the defensive stats. We then have Leeds, Man City and Spurs. So Leeds, a little bit of surprise there, but I guess they might have had easier fixtures. But really happy to see Brighton and Brentford before they double game week here. So if you guys do want to bring in those assets, even for a hit, I think the Brighton and Brentford defenders look pretty strong, especially with that game week 29 double also coming around. Now finally, going on to the worst defenses, are definitely teams to target on the attacking side, so let's hope that we see some double game week options here. Over the entire season, Fulham have been the worst defense, conceding 1.72 XG per game. We then have Bournemouth, Nottingham Forest, so all the kind of newly promoted side, which is a little bit expected, and finally Everton, Aston Villa and Leicester. Now bringing up the right hand side, we've seen kind of a rearrangement of the order, similar like we had with the XG, Bournemouth, Aston Villa, Leicester, Nottingham Forest, Everton, and then finally Fulham. So the left hand side just rearranged. Now in terms of assets coming up, obviously Everton is going to be on the radar. We have Ivan Toney facing them away from home, and it's a little bit hard to say how Sean Dyche has improved that defense, because even though he has been the manager for a few games now, they're still been conceding a few goals. Now Crystal Palace or Southampton aren't here, so a little bit hard to say how those teams have been performing, but purely based on the XG stats, Ivan Toney looks like a must captain. So that's going to kind of wrap up the stats review. As seen, the Brighton and the Brentford defenses look pretty strong. The Brighton attack looks especially good. It might just be quite hard to predict which Brighton mid might score the most points. But now moving on to the next talking point, which is going to be how many hits should you guys be taking this game week. Now this talking point mainly revolves around the fact that if you guys haven't wildcarded game week 26, game week 27, or at least hopefully you haven't, because if you did wildcard in game week 26 and you're looking to take a few hits, that's not the most optimal strategy. So in terms of how many hits should you guys be taking if you are looking at a -4 or -8, it's obviously very dependent on who you're taking out. Let's for example say you are taking out a blank game week 28 option for a player that does feature. That's going to be worth the extra points there, because you're obviously taking out a player that'll get 0 points for hopefully a player that'll get 2. Then added to that, the double game weeks, if you want to bring in a Brighton, a Brentford defender and attacker, I would suggest taking a hit, as they do have doubles coming up in 29 if you aren't choosing to free it. So in terms of how many hits to take, I guess you guys could go up to a -12 or -16 even, as long as the hits are going to be worth it in the long run. Now with double game weeks and blank game weeks, it makes it a lot easier to take hits, especially if you want to captain the options you bring in. For example, let's say you want to captain Ivan Toney, you want to take another asset for them, that's going to give you double the chance of making the points back. Same can be said about a double game week, a blank game week, so on and so forth. So just kind of work out how many points you predict, or go over to any site that you want for projected points, and as long as the hit is going to be worth it in the long run, you should be fine. Now if you guys have any dilemmas to go over, maybe you guys want to ask me about your transfer plan and if it's worth taking the hits, comment it down below on my Discord server and I'll try to get back to you as soon as possible. Now the next talking point is going to revolve around the bench boost, and I'll be going into a more in-depth kind of situational for my own team discussion in tomorrow's team selection, and I'll show you my bench versus the bench in 29. Now in terms of the bench, there is a main pro to kind of bench boosting this game week, and that's the fact that before game week 29's double, there's an international break. So for 2 weeks, we're going to have options playing all around the world. For example, Stupinan and Matoma are apparently playing in Japan and also Australia. So we're actually hoping that they are going to be back for game week 29 in time. So if they're not going to be back, it's obviously going to deteriorate our kind of bench boost performance, and that's why so many people are keen on actually bench boosting this week. You guys would have seen my bench. I've got kind of Kepa, Gabriel, Odegaard, and then finally Botman. All relatively good games, single game week options, but still good games. And the fact is, at the current moment, we know those players should feature, and therefore the risk of the future game weeks in terms of injuries and also being dropped doesn't really occur. So that's the big pro about bench boosting in game week 27, is the fact that what's in front of us is in front of us, where it is a little bit of a risk kind of waiting for about 3 weeks time to actually use the bench boost. That's what I always say. I like using the wildcard the 1 week and the bench boost the next week, because it nullifies the risk of injuries and that sort of thing. But using the bench boost in double game week 29 might be slightly more profitable. So that's the big pro and the big con about the double game week 29 bench boost, is the risk but also the reward. So what strategy are you guys going to go for? Now one added thing is the fact that maybe if you do use the bench boost this week, you might be forced to use a transfer. So also keep that in mind when you guys are weighing up the options. But let me know in the comments down below what you guys are doing. I've seen a lot of people actually using the bench boost this week. It might be a slightly different strategy to most people that have wildcarded in game week 26. I think the majority of people will go with that double game week 29 bench boost. Now the final talking point to go over is going to be all about captaincy, and this week it proves to be quite a spicy one. Should you guys go for a double game week option? Which double game week team to focus on? Or are there single game week options that also could be good captains? And I'm going to start off with my favorite option for this week. That's going to be Ivan Toney, and the simple reason for that is that he escaped a yellow card on Monday and therefore should be fine for both games in double game week 27. Now yes, he might be banned for kind of the betting situation, but I think the minimum is going to be April and therefore should be fine for game week 27. Now Everton away and Southampton away would have loved if these games are going to be home fixtures, because away from home I don't think Brentford have been that strong. But still, it's Ivan Toney, he's more of a talisman than these other assets, and therefore he could be the right captain to go for. But now going on to the Brighton midfielders, and guys, it's such a close call between any of these guys. I'd really recommend going to kind of a wheel generator or just flipping a coin, because between the three of them, McAllister, Matoma and Solly March, it's super hard to decide. Now I've gone for Solly March because I am kind of a stats manager, his stats look stronger, and the big thing about these two fixtures is both Crystal Palace and Leeds have conceded the most chances down Solly March's flank. So that's a major pull in my opinion to go for Solly March. Yes, for example, what you could say is that he'll drive in, create the chance from the right, drift it to Matoma on the left, and Matoma finishes it, therefore getting more points. So multiple ways to interpret it, but I'm just going to say that Solly March has the best kind of flank in these two fixtures. But obviously you guys can go for McAllister, go for Matoma, it's very close between all of them. Now between going for Ivan Toney or whatever Brighton mid you want to go for, it's quite a hard decision. So my current thinking is I'm going for Ivan Toney because he's more of a talisman. The fact is that any three of the Brighton midfielders might score more points, and I do think they are slightly more explosive than Ivan Toney. But let's look at my own team. I've got Matoma, I've got March. If I captain the wrong one, it's going to be double the pain. So I do think Ivan Toney is slightly safer. But what I would say, if you guys want to play a little bit more risky, go for a little bit more of a differential, I would pick the Brighton midfielder. As I mentioned, a high ceiling in my opinion, but also more risky. Now if you guys do want to go for kind of a single game week option, I would say the ceiling is slightly lower, but also the chance of points might still be there, and there are a few assets to actually look at. You guys would have seen that Bournemouth have a pretty terrible defense over the last 6, Liverpool have a great attack, and therefore Mo Salah could be a no-brainer. But I've decided to go for a more consistent option this season, that's going to be Harry Kane against Nottingham Forest at home. Nottingham Forest, also a pretty bad defense, and even though Spurs haven't been playing that well at the moment, I do think it's going to be a miracle if Kane doesn't score in this one. So yes, you could go for Salah, I think he's a fine option, Harry Kane's also a great option, but I think you have to go for a double game week asset, and that's my selection of Ivan Toney or going for Solly March. So post-production Dayvy, going to hop back on this track because I forgot to tell you guys about the projected points. In terms of the projected points, I've taken these from Fantasy Football Fix as I always do. In terms of Toney, he's projected to score 9.6, Solly March 9.4, I want you guys to know that he's the best Brighton midfielder on the website. Then Harry Kane has a projected points of 7.2. So in terms of those points, Ivan Toney projected to be the best point scorer, but Solly March is super close. Let me know in the comments down below, who are you guys going for? Are you guys going for a Brighton midfielder or Brentford attacker? Or even going for someone like a Raya in goal? Otherwise, the single gaming option is also pretty reliable. Haven't even mentioned a Haaland here, Crystal Palace away. It's still a great fixture on paper, so you could even be a no-brainer to be honest. But I think right now I'm leaning towards going for Ivan Toney. Escape the yellow card, is a talisman. Let's hope that Brighton continue this unbeaten streak by scoring a massive amount of goals. But this is basically a wrap of the video, guys. Hopefully you did enjoy it. So don't like, video, and subscribe if you haven't subscribed yet. I'll be seeing you guys for the team selection tomorrow, where we'll be deciding if we're going to bench boost or not. Let me know if you guys are choosing to use the chip this week. But I'm myself, Dayvy FPL, and I'm out. Cheers, bye.